Wow. Okay, there you heard from that officer. I was not in fear at that point. Emily Camapgno is joining me, criminal defense attorney. I apologize if I messed up your name because it's a hard one. But listen, Emily, let's go back to that critical testimony that we just heard. This is the shooting. This officer was there. He's describing what happened. What do you make of it?
Well, I just want to point out for listeners and viewers the fact that oftentimes a position of authority in a courtroom, a police officer's testimony has such weight, it has such credibility, right? And that is in part why oftentimes officers' credibility is outweighs other experts or others' testimonies in cases like this. This is why it's so difficult for others to overcome that presumption that the officer is telling the truth and is honest about saying, look, I was in reasonable fear for my life. So the fact then that another officer who was there right in that exact same position, literally 2 feet away, was testifying to the contrary, that is huge here. And that could be an absolutely pivotal testimony.
I agree, because we also, and hopefully we'll turn this around for our audience too, we also saw some of the body cam footage a little bit earlier. And I'll tell you what, it was Roy Oliver, the defendant's body camera. It was hard to tell what was happening. You know, you heard gunshots, you heard a guy running, you saw young teenagers, there was noise, there was music. So if you're just basing your case on the body camera alone, I think it's difficult. Now, of course, I've only seen it once. I'd want to watch it over and over and over again. However, that testimony from the officer, he's pretty clear on what happened.
Exactly, and I felt the same way when I saw the video. Essentially, it was difficult to understand what's going on, and that's why the power of the narrative for the jury should be and has the power to be so persuasive. That's also why it's up to the prosecution to build a super strong case, and it's as well up to the defense to poke holes in it, because as the jury is looking at body cam footage that could be interpreted in potentially multiple different ways, then they will be susceptible to that power of persuasion. So essentially, as they see the same video and then hear 2 different narratives for it, again, it all goes back to what is more credible, what is more persuasive.
And I'm sure we're probably going to hear from some of the teenagers, the survivors that were inside the vehicle where young 15-year-old Jordan Edwards was shot. So we're going to continue to very closely monitor that trial that's going on right now in Texas. The judge called a lunch break, and as soon as we see a live feed come back into the courtroom, we'll take you there. I believe testimony will begin probably in about a half an hour, so you're definitely going to want to stick around for that. In the meantime, we've gotten some new footage in from that woman who killed her attorney boyfriend. Was it murder or self-defense? You got to hear these text messages we just heard about. Stay with us. Okay, wow. Let's break this down. By the way, that photo you see right there of Shayna Huber, she then sent that to her friend, Dr. Christy Euler, that you heard on the stand, describing the text message of her at a shooting range with a gun. But let's break this down, Emily. She's been my guest this afternoon. Do we take this? This is important. But is this a serious threat? Does this seem to you like she's really plotting to kill her boyfriend, Ryan?
Right, that's the ultimate question that the jurors are going to be called upon to answer. Is this just jesting? Is this the stuff that everyone says every day, like, oh, he kills me, or oh, I'm so angry I could murder him? I mean, is that normal? Or is it normal only up until you actually get into an altercation where someone ends up dead? And so I think what the jurors are also confronted with a lot in this case is an overload of information by the defendant herself. For example, that 911 call is incredibly long, and it's actually really detailed. And at times, the prosecution can use it. You know, is it an excited utterance? Is she saying things that will get her into trouble later? There is so much evidence from the defendant herself leading up to and then after the actual killing. It's a lot for the jury to take on, for them to make that ultimate decision of, was she planning this all along?
But let's talk specifically about these text messages. I'm going to read it again. They deserve to burn in hell. And of course, the dentist friend and Shayna both, obviously had tumultuous relationships. They're both going through boyfriend breakups. Okay, so they deserve to burn in hell if they don't change. When I go to the shooting range with Ryan tonight, I want to turn around, shoot, kill him, and play like it's an accident. Let me tell you something. If I got that text message from my friend, I'd be seriously concerned. And there she is at the shooting range, smiling.
Right.
There she is.
Right. Maybe it's my Italian blood that to me, I'm like, oh, people get that heated all the time,
Yeah.
right? I'm just like kind of hyperbolic. People say all the time.
But that matters, Emily. That matters because how do people respond to situations? Maybe she's the type that blows her lid all the time and says stuff like that.
Right.
You know?
Right? And if that's the case, then it behooves the defense to show a multitude of information like that going back years. Look, she says this all the time. She never meant it. You know, it happened to be this unfortunate circumstance where she was then in an abusive relationship. Or they can maybe spin it and say, well, that shows the level of fear she felt, that she literally at all times feared for her life. Now, that could be a stretch. And as you said, if a reasonable person would receive a text message like that and would be concerned and said, you know what, this isn't something to joke about, right? Guns are not something to kid about. You're not just saying you're in an argument. You're actually talking about something that could be fatal at a gun range. That could be incredibly serious. So
okay,
here,
so,
again,
so the best person to answer whether or not she believed this was a real threat is that Dr. Christy Euler, who received the text message. Take a listen, because that is the exact question that is asked. Take a listen to this sound. Okay, so that's very interesting. So there is Dr. Christy Euler. She is the one that received the text message from Shayna Huber saying that she wanted to kill Ryan. And she's saying, no, I did not think that this was a real threat on Ryan's life. Does that matter, Emily?
I think that has a huge potential for credibility and sway with the jury. Absolutely. This is her close friend. If anyone would know her, it would be her. And I will say that this would be an opportunity for the prosecution to kind of play on the subtlety here, to dig deeper and say, well, is that simply because you give your friend the benefit of the doubt? Is that based on your subjective feeling? Not that you know her so well as you know she didn't mean it, but that you always would afford your friend, oh, of course you don't mean it. That's human nature, right? To give that opportunity to those that we love. So I do think that there's that kind of opportunity, again, for a nuance for prosecution to take. But you saw the reaction immediately there. Well, if you did think, and the judge was very quick to say, no, that, you know, that's stricken and that's not going to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and I think this testimony is critical, but, you know, a lot of these things can be explained away, certainly. You know, and my question in this case, and we'll get to this in a little bit, Emily, but my question is Shayna Hubers going to take the stand herself? Because she has some explaining to do. Why did she send the text message if this was self-defense? And why, and we've showed this on the network before, did she start singing and dancing during that police interview? I don't get that part. We have a lot going on here at the network. Stick with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes. I want to break this down now because this scene is so important to understand exactly what happened. It's a little bit convoluted. But Roy Oliver was responding to a 911 call of reports of some drunken teenagers, a loud party. When he's inside the house with another officer, there he is, Lieutenant Roy Oliver, he hears gunshots. Him and his partner, the other officer, go running to where they think the shots are coming from, and they see a vehicle. And that's when what you just heard the prosecutor explain what happened. That prosecutor said no reasonable officer would have opened fire. There he is, innocent, according to prosecutors, 15-year-old Jordan Edwards, who lost his life way too early. Emily, you've been standing by my guest criminal defense attorney this afternoon. Let's break this down and what the prosecutor says here. Is this a confusing situation, or do you think it seems pretty clear that the officer overstepped what he should have done and killed someone?
Right. I mean, ultimately, obviously, that's going to be up to the jury here. And I will say that I agree with you, however, that it's a confusing scenario, and certainly a lot of the evidence can be confusing for the jury. And that's why, as I stated a bit earlier, it's incumbent upon both prosecution and defense to make it as simple as possible and as clear as possible, so that each narrative, whichever is more credible to the jury, is able to explain everything. So here we're going to have prosecution basically say, look, this was an officer with a history of aggression who had questionable answers or questionable reports in psych evaluations, including a high propensity for rejection of authority and kind of a bloated self-esteem that would mean that in high-risk situations, quote, that his decisions might be questionable. That's all going to go into the theory of the case. And along with an officer that was standing next to him that did not fear for his life at the time as he just testified. And they're going to contrast that with the defense, which is basically going to say, look, here was an officer that had been called via 911 to an unruly situation. It was at night, it was dark, there were kids running everywhere, and shots were fired. And he ran out toward the sound of gunshots.
It was dark, Emily. Yep.
Right, to protect the lives of children. And it was in his position, he saw subjectively a car that was reversing toward him. He absolutely feared for his life at that time. So again, the simplicity is paramount for the jury to make sense of, again, you're right, what is and could be a confusing situation.
Well, that's why there's a potential here that he could either be acquitted or end up with a hung jury, because there's so much gray area. Yes, on the one hand, we heard that officer that we heard before the lunch break saying he was not in fear for his life. And he did describe a situation where the Impala, the vehicle the teenagers were in, were driving away. However, when it's dark, when there's a shooting that just went on, when things are loud, when you have the adrenaline going, perhaps you could see why an officer might have thought something was coming at him. It's very unclear, and we're going to continue, Emily, if you don't mind sticking around for a few more minutes. I know you have to go soon. Oh, wait, you know what? You have to go, so we'll say goodbye to you. When we come back more into this case, and hopefully we'll take you live. Stay with us.